palliative care because I wanted to see how it was done well. I'd seen it done very badly as a student nurse, and I thought there must be a better way. So, and then my real passion was older people. It's always been my passion. In fact, one of my first memories is going round to a lady's house called Mrs. Smith with my mum and having homemade lemonade and cake. And I think perhaps that's where the seeds were sown for my love of older people and working amongst older people. So I was a nurse and I worked with older people, worked in a care home for older people, and then I had children. I gave up nursing and I worked in charities for older people. And then in 2014, God just opened all the doors to set up what is now Embracing Age, which is a Christian charity for older people, and really focused on embracing older people with God's love. I might have a slide about this, actually. I can't even remember what's on. Oh, there we are. Okay, so that's Embracing Age. So we have 3 strands to our work. One is getting volunteers into care homes, combating loneliness. Research shows older people in care homes twice as likely to feel severely lonely as older people in the community, so we do that. We've got another project supporting carers. We have a weekly Zoom for informal carers. If you know any informal carers, they're very welcome to join. We spend an hour together chatting and praying together. And then the other stuff we do is these sort of webinars equipping churches in their work amongst older people. So that's Embracing Age. Okay. Good. We'll come on now to the real reason we're all here. So, why do we need to think strategically about ministry amongst older people? Well, I think there's 3 reasons. First of all, the UK has an ageing population. It's not just the UK, it's actually worldwide. The world is ageing. So, the stats are on there. Yeah, so the number of centenarians, that's a hard word to say, increased by 85%. 85%, get that into your heads, between 2012 and 2017. So the number of people living to be over 100 has just shot up. It's actually levelling out a little bit more now, but between those years, it's shot up.
Did you say 2012?
Between 2012 and 2017, yeah, increased by 85%. Have I put a typo on your notes? I don't know. Anyway, so... Yeah, it's very surprising, isn't it? By 2030, it's predicted that 1 in 5 people will be aged over 65, and the over 85 age group is the fastest growing, and it's forecast to double in the next 20 years. Now, this isn't bad news, I'm telling you. This is good news. It means we're all living longer. That's something to be celebrated. Another reason we're ageing is because people are having fewer children. But generally, you know, people talk about it, the burden of an ageing population, but that's nonsense. You know, it's a positive thing and we need to see it positively. Now, the church is actually ageing faster than the rest of society. So in 2000, the over 65s accounted for 25% of congregation members, and this is steadily growing. By 2030, it's predicted that 45%, so nearly half our congregations, will be over 65. And in line with the rest of society, the over 85s are the fastest growing group amongst our congregation. They accounted for just 5% of the over 65 congregation at the start of the millennium, and it's predicted to rise to 19%. So that's just to give you some stats. And, you know, the reality is, as well as it being a good thing that we're all getting older, when you start getting to the over 85 age group, and I don't want to stereotype, but it's just the reality. I think my father-in-law he's probably about 86 now, and he's just saying, I'm starting to feel old. You know, he's just been diagnosed with an illness, and you know, when we do get to those older years, that is where frailty can set in a bit more. Now, just to put that in perspective, in his 80s, he sailed around single-handed around Ireland. So, you know, as I say, we don't want to stereotype, but there is a point when we perhaps begin to feel our age a bit more when we're over 85. So then the third reason that we need to think strategically about ministry amongst older people is that the church should be a great place to grow old. And I love these verses in Zechariah. This is the Message version. It just puts it so well. It says, old men and old women will come back to Jerusalem, sit on benches on the streets and spin tales, move safely with their canes, a good city to grow old in. And boys and girls will fill the public parks, laughing and playing, a good city to grow up in. Now, if you're a theologian, and I'm not, but if you are, often Jerusalem is seen to represent the church in the Bible. And so what this verse could be saying is that the church should be both a good place to grow up in and a good place to grow old in. Now, I think often we focused on this idea of growing up in church and making it a good place for young people and children. You know, let's get young families back into church. Let's make sure our young people stay within church. And they're all good and noble things. You know, I've got 3 young people of my own. Well, they're officially adults now. But, you know, I want them to stay in church. I want church to be a good place for them. But if we do it at the detriment of the church being a good place to grow old in, I actually think that lacks authenticity. And our young people, they can smell that a mile away, actually. You know, if they see, hang on, you know, you're making church this wonderful place for me, and then you're not looking after your older people, that's gonna, you know, they won't like that. But whether they like it or not is wrong anyway. You know, we need both. We need the church to be a good place to grow up in and a good place to grow old in. Now, that does beg the question, what does it mean to be old? How do you define old? I'm not necessarily expecting you to answer that question because I think it actually depends how old you are. So a 4-year-old, I don't know if any of you saw that television programme. It was on Channel 4 a few years ago now, where they had a nursery school in a care home, and they asked a 4-year-old, how old is really old? Hold that thought, we'll come back to it. One of the best definitions I like, a member of our congregation in Twickenham, I asked him, he's in the over 65 age group, and I said, how old is old? And he said, 10 years older than me. And I thought, actually, that's a really good definition because it's all relative, isn't it? The 4-year-old thought 30 was really old, so we're all ancient by her standards. What can be helpful is to take the numbers out of the equation, to think about the 3rd and the 4th age of life. So the 3rd age of life is the actively retired, people who are living independently and they're active in their retirement. And then the 4th age is more when people become frailer, they become more, have more physical and cognitive challenges, which makes them less able to live independently. And as a nurse, when I was working, one of my jobs was in a day hospital for older people. So people would come in for the day, have their treatments, and then go home again. And I had a 96-year-old lady come in. She had leather trousers on, big glasses. And her problem was she couldn't put her riding boots on anymore. She used to go riding every day in Hyde Park, but her legs had become swollen and she couldn't do it. So we sorted her legs out and off she went riding again. Now, she is clearly someone at 96 years old who is still in the 3rd age of life. Now, I've also looked after people in their 60s and 70s who have got health conditions and who are much more dependent. So it can be helpful just to take numbers out of the equation and think in terms of the 3rd and 4th age of life. One of the things that there's a danger of is that we sort of lump old people together in one homogenous group. Now, this is a picture. This is my daughter when she was about 22, holding a 2-month-old. You wouldn't think to put them in the same age generation, would you, as a 2 months and a 22-year-old, and yet so often we'll put a 65-year-old and an 85-year-old in the same generation, you know, whereas actually, if you think just in terms of this older people, there's a good few generations in there, you know, and especially as we're living longer, those generations increase. You know, you've got, I don't know, your baby boomers and then the war you know, there's a lot of different generations, and we can't stereotype within those generations, but we are shaped by the culture that we grew up in. So it's good to not sort of lump all older people together. I had a very interesting conversation with my mum and dad. They're in their 70s, and when I was writing my book, which I'll talk about later, I was asking them, you know, how do you like to be referred to? What do you think about being called seniors? And they were like, no, we are not seniors. And interestingly, I was chatting to someone in church yesterday who was like, we are not seniors. I was like, okay. So I said, well, to my mum and dad, I said, well, how do you want to be labelled? And they were like, well, we don't want a label. You know, my mum said I would call myself young at heart. And my dad said, well, I would just say I was in my 70s. And so I said, okay, well, I said, what about the label actively retired? And they said, well, if we had to have a label, that one will do, I suppose. Although my dad did say, he said, but I'd rather be inactive and retired, but Mum won't let me. But it's really important how we think about our language and the vocabulary when we're talking about older people's ministry, and indeed what we call our ministry amongst older people. Certainly something to think about, because these sort of labels will shape whether the church is a good place to grow old in. And that's actually quite foundational to any ministry amongst older people. Now, there's a temptation to view people who are in the fourth age of life, those who are less able to live independently, as somehow of less value, as if our value is based on what we can give and what we can do. As a flip side of that we tend to value people in the third age of life because of what they can give, you know. I call it rota fodder, you know, more time on their hands, they can fill slots on rotas. And actually that's equally just as wrong, because our value isn't based on what we do, whether it's what we can do or what we can't do. So both of those things are dangerous. I don't know if you've ever been in churches and I have to be careful what I say, but you know, you just feel like all they want you for is the slots you can fill on the rotas, you know. Oh dear, it drives me mad. Anyway, that's aside. You know, our worth is not based on what we can do, or what we can't do, what we can give, what we can't give. So if that's not what now, rotas do need filling. I ought to just qualify that, you know, because I do have some vicars here and people in leadership, and I do know rotas need filling. But it's just when people feel that that's where their value is based on filling those rotas, that's where it's wrong. So if our value isn't derived by what we can give, what is our value derived from? So I've got 4 things that the Bible talks about, that how our value is derived. And this is taken from John Swinton's book, Dementia, Living in the Memories of God. And I've adapted it a little bit. It's a really good book if you want to read it, but it's quite meaty and heavy going. So I'm just giving you some highlights here and changed it a little bit. So first of all then, we are dependent. There we are. We're dependent. Now, this is a really interesting one, because you know what? Our society values independence. I remember talking at our seniors group at church. It's called Seniors Life Group, that's why I'm saying that. About the importance of this, that we're all dependent. And they were like, they so value their independence. You know, we all want to be, and I do as well, you know, we just... Somehow there's something about independence, isn't there, that we really value. But actually, if you look how God created us, he created us to be dependent. He says in Galatians, carry one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Now, I've got a little video for you to watch. It's a quote, but I thought rather than me just quoting it to you, because you've heard my voice enough tonight, John Stott, he was a theologian, and when he was in his 80s, he had a fall and he fractured his hip, I think, and he became dependent on people for a period of his life. And this is his reflection on our dependence as Christians. So let's watch this for a minute. Hopefully this is going to work. Yeah.
We come into this world totally dependent on the love, care and protection of others. We go through a phase of life when other people are dependent on us. And most of us will go out of this world totally dependent on the love and care of others. And this is not an evil, destructive reality. It is part of the design, part of the physical nature God has given us. I sometimes hear old people, including Christian people who should know better, say, I don't want to be a burden to anyone else. I'm happy to carry on living so long as I can look after myself, but as soon as I become a burden, I would rather die. But this is wrong. We are all designed to be a burden to others. You are designed to be a burden to me, and I am designed to be a burden to you. And the life of the family, including the life of the local church family, should be one of mutual burdensomeness. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Christ himself takes on the dignity of dependence. He is born a baby, totally dependent on the care of his mother. He needs to be fed, he needs his bottom to be white, he needs to be propped up when he rolls over. And yet, he never loses his divine dignity. And at the end, on the cross, he again becomes totally dependent, limbs pierced and stretched, unable to move. So, in the person of Christ, we learn that dependence does not, cannot deprive a person of their dignity, of their supreme worth. And if dependence was appropriate for the God of the universe, it is certainly appropriate for us.
Challenging, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I definitely value my independence, and learning that sort of dependence on others is a hard thing. And when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of when Jesus sent out, however many he sent out, the 12 or the 72, one of them anyway. And if you remember, he says, take nothing with you, and when you go into a house, etc., etc. And I'd always thought, oh yeah, because they've got to be dependent on God to meet all their needs. And then when I thought about it, I thought, no, actually, they've got to be dependent on other people as well. You know, he's making them go and be in other people's houses. And I had a situation last year where I had to go and stay with somebody I didn't know. My daughter had an accident on her first night at university, and anyway, long story, but I suddenly had this situation where I had to go and stay at someone's house who were very kind enough, a friend of a friend, to let me stay, but I really struggled with this kind of, oh, I'm dependent on other people here. It makes you feel quite vulnerable. But anyway, dependence, we're designed for dependence, so that's the first thing. Secondly, we are created in the image of God. No, or not? There we are. Yes, we are. Okay, you know these verses. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And, you know, this is the beginning of time. This is God's design. You know, we're created in the image of God. And then it goes on in Genesis 2 to say that God formed us from the dust and breathed his breath into us. And if we just meditate on that for a minute, you know, we've got the breath of God in us. That's what distinguishes us from the rest of creation. You know, it's at the heart of our identity as human beings. And, you know, everything that we are flows from it, doesn't it? You know, we are sons and daughters of the King of Kings. And you've probably heard the saying, I think, therefore I am. But what happens when you can't think anymore? If you've got cognitive impairment, does that mean you're less of a person? No, of course it doesn't, because our identity is that we're created in the image of God, that we're sons and daughters of the King. That's where our identity is based. So if we've got cognitive decline, if we've got physical decline, if we can't think anymore, it doesn't change who we are, who's God created us to be. Next one, we're loved. And I think that's something we all need just to remind ourselves of. You know, I don't know about you, but sometimes it's easy as a Christian to forget that. You know, we go on in life we've been a Christian for a long time, and we forget that actually love is about, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You know, it wasn't about anything that we did. You know, when you've been a Christian for a while, it's like, I haven't read my Bible, I haven't prayed enough, haven't done this enough. Or the opposite extreme, oh, I'm feeling so holy today, let's shine my halo because I've done all this stuff. But actually, it was never about what we did or didn't do while we were still sinners, while we were totally alienated from God. He died for us, he loves us. And I love reading the Apostle John, because if you read like in 1 John and so forth, he's towards the end of his life at that stage, and the thing he keeps coming back to time and time again is the love of God. You know, that it's not something that's so simple that we shouldn't go back to it all the time. You know, it's actually something that is so profound we should go back to it all the time. You know, that is where our identity is. That is who we are, who God has made us to be, and it's not about our performance. It's not about what we do, what we don't do. It's unconditional. And it goes on in Romans to say that nothing can separate us from God's love, and it's a whole load of things. What are they? Present, future, angels, demons, etc., etc. And I love to think and add into that. I know we're not meant to add to the Bible, but you get the gist of it. You know, that dementia, frailty, none of those things can separate us from the love of God. Okay, fourthly then, we're dependent, created in the image of God, loved and relational. We were created for relationship. If we go back to God's original design again in Genesis, God said it's not good for man to be alone. And you know what? The pandemic has highlighted that, hasn't it? I mean, the huge rise in mental health challenges after all these lockdowns, and the loneliness and the isolation. You've probably heard the stats that loneliness is more harmful than smoking like 10 cigarettes a day or something like that in terms of its impact on our health. And I think, loneliness can impact us at any stage in life. You know, there's a lot of loneliness amongst young people at any stage. But I think when you're into the fourth age of life, loneliness can impact you more, because actually, and again, we don't want to stereotype, but often your social circle is reducing, whether that's through bereavement, you're losing friends and loved ones, whether it's through your own physical decline, that you can't get out as much. Things like hearing loss and visual impairment, they make us feel much more isolated, because, you know, when you can't hear, it's a real struggle, isn't it? So all those sort of things mean that as we get older into that fourth age of life, we're much more prone to feeling lonely and isolated. I've got a stat here, 49% of older people say the TV or pets is their main companion. And then when you compare that with statistics that say people in care homes are twice as likely to feel severely lonely, you realise just what a serious problem it is. So all these things, being dependent, created in the image of God, loved and relational, they're all what the Bible says about who God has made us to be, and they don't change. They don't change. Someone who is in a care home in the fourth age of life is still loved, is still in need of relationship, is still created in the image of God. And as I say, how we view older people is fundamental to any strategy that we have around ministry amongst older people, because it's all foundational. And now in a minute we're going to just split up in groups and have a think about strategy and the aims of our ministry amongst older people. But before I do that, I just want to qualify one thing, and that's this. I'm going to say one thing, then I'm going to contradict myself, but hopefully you'll understand what I mean, is not all older people are needy. Now, I'm going to contradict myself, because actually we're all needy. You know, we don't like to think about it, but, you know, I'm needy. I need a sense of purpose in life. I need to feel loved. I need to feel like I'm doing something that makes a difference. You know, they're my needs. We all have needs, so we're all needy. But when I say not all older people are needy, what I mean is sometimes, especially when we think into the fourth age of life, we can have this view, stereotypical view, if we're not careful, that older people are needy. So yes, they are, but so are you, and so am I. You know, we're all needy, and so we just need to be careful of that stereotype. So what I want us to do then is consider, hopefully this will come up, what what are we built? These are our foundations that I've just said. So what are we building on those foundations? What is the aim of our ministry amongst older people within our churches? So what I want you to do is just break into groups of 3 or 4 if you want, and just have a think about that for a minute. You know, in your church, in what you're doing, what's the aims of your ministry? You know, are you seeking to reduce loneliness, improve well-being? Is there something more to it than that? Just have a chat about that for 5 minutes within your little groups. And I'm going to drink some coffee and stop talking for a while. And if you're watching on the video, just write some thoughts down.
Are you a member of this church? Hello. Hi, Reg. Nice to meet you. I'm Elspeth.
And you're
From Leyland Church. Johnny from Leyland.
more Asian, I think I'm in the 50s, but...
Is there a 5th age?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's glory, I think.
Well, no.
It's 4 glory.
It's when you go back and think that your age is the other way round. So if you're 75, you're only 57.
Okay.
So,
Come and join this group.
I always forget. I am 32.
So you're 23.
Wow.
Think of it like that.
Okay.
Right? I'm 83, so I'm 38. And I try and remind myself I'm 38. I have to be careful who's listening to me. But if you can try and think of yourself, what did you do when you were your younger age? What were your aims and aspirations? What did you hope to achieve in life? Whatever you achieved that you hope to achieve, where are you along the path that you hoped you would walk? Now, when I had many people working for me, we used to have, in those days, a 5-year plan. Now I think we've got a 5-minute plan because, you know, the way the world's changing. But nevertheless, I used to say, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Is this an actual question that you
Yeah.
want me to answer? Where do I see myself in 5 years?
Yeah.
God willing, ministering at some church somewhere in some sort of role. But
So,
I'm very open.
so are you a minister at
I am.
Leyland?
I'm one of the ministers at Leyland.
Lovely. Okay, fine. So you hope to be in the ministry, and you hope to expand your ministry,
Actually, that
and
sounds
more
very like
experience.
a cornerstone.
Well, I guess.
On a Monday morning, it says like the same. Fetching,
Right.
young mother,
Um,
whoever.
what else to say? Well, I
Well,
can-
shall we?
do you know,
shall we
can
Shall
I-
we look at the
some of
question?
Let's
Yeah.
ask this, yes.
because I can talk all day about anything. You like.
Well, tell us about, are you involved in ministry amongst older people at your church?
Yes, there's 3 or 4 of us around.
Yes.
Peter, myself, and the lady who's unwell at the moment.
Okay. So what's the sort
This
of...
is our pastoral team.
Okay.
And we've divided the congregation up in a way in which we have identified those who are getting on, and we have tried to make sure that amongst the 4 of us we have a way in which we, at least on a monthly basis, know where they are, where they've come from, what they've experienced, what their problems are for the future, so that we can offer support where needed.
So what would you say your aim is to support?
Our aim is to make sure that those who've had an active life that still seem as if they have lost that activity, but they're still wanted. And I think our aim is to say, although you can't come to church, we remember you, and we hope that when you need us, we're here, because some people, since the pandemic, have really become I think, you know, frightened almost to go out, and now they can go out, equally frightened to go out as well, because it's a whole new ball game.
Yes.
People are walking around without masks on.
Yes, that's a big, it's been lots of big challenges like that,
Yeah.
haven't there, recently for everyone?
Elspeth, what about for us?
Oh.
Ask you because I don't know the answer.
So I'm also from Leyland.
Yes.
So,
Are you related?
no. So thinking about the aim of our ministry amongst older people, well, just thinking about one thing we are doing since COVID, actually, we have introduced a weekly coffee morning in church that then links to a midweek service. So we used to have a fortnightly coffee morning just on its own, but since COVID we've made it every week, and we have now a little short service that we gently encourage people to stay for if they would like to. There's no pressure. People can leave if they want to. And so in that setting we are aiming to invite and welcome people, not just church members but people in the local community, in to the church building to meet Christians, to build fellowship and friendship. And then with our service we're encouraging them to have a sense of belonging to God's people and coming to know the Lord for themselves if they don't know him, and be strengthened and encouraged in the challenges of life if they do. So I suppose that's sort of one thing.
Can I ask a question?
Do.
So, I mean, obviously, at different stages of life, people have different kind of needs and situations and circumstances. But I just wonder, to what extent actually ministry with one age against another age should actually be, in its aim at least, in any way different. You know, for children, we want them to grow up in their faith, understand more of the Lord, love him more, give more of their life to him, serve him. And for the oldest person, do we not want to find more ways of encouraging them in growing and serving in particular ways that are suitable for that particular stage of their life? And I mean, should there be any kind of difference between a 5-year-old and a 95-year-old?
Very good question. I mean, I see discipleship as a lifelong journey, so the way people are discipled might be different across the ages, but actually it's a lifelong journey, because when you're 95 there's different challenges that you're facing that perhaps you need to grow in, you know, your understanding of. And
I part of the reason I was wondering about it is because, you know, we do practice and prep with teenagers, you know, where we want them to kind of encourage them in their Bible reading, their prayer and the like. And whereas I kind of think of some of the really godly, mature people of our congregation, particularly those who have been kind of missionaries, and you kind of easily think, oh, they're kind of complete. You know, they don't need my help. They can kind of do it themselves. And
I always think of, I don't always, but I don't know if you know the Narnia series. I love the Narnia series, and there's one time when, I think it's in Prince Caspian, when Lucy is back in Narnia and she sees Aslan again, and she says, Aslan, you're bigger, you know, and he says, no, it's you who've grown, and it's something like that, but it's this idea that there's always more, you know, that as we grow, God grows, you know. I mean, he doesn't grow obviously, but perhaps our understanding of him grows. And it's like, I think in the last battle they talk about further in and further up, you know, that you're always deeper, there's always more that we can learn of God, you know. We think we got it, and then like God just throws us a curveball to teach us something different. So yeah, even people in later life, you know, there's
and yet,
still
to argue
more.
against myself, arguably some people can sustain their own spiritual life more on their own. So perhaps there is a wisdom in focusing on particular people more at any age. So maybe, I don't know.
I think different challenges, isn't it? People have different. So obviously, you know, our hopes for people are the same, that they would be walking with the Lord and knowing his strength and serving him, whatever age. But as you know, as you pointed out really well, Tina, that there are at different stages we have different opportunities and different challenges. So if you're still quite active and you've retired, then there's lots of opportunities in a church and in a fellowship, isn't there? And as you grow and become less able, then there's opportunities to receive, and so it just depends on what stage you're at, really.
Well, I think, can I just say, for 5 years, well, longer than that, but 5 years I was a 24/7 carer. My wife had dementia, and it got worse and worse and worse into Alzheimer's. For 2 years, we only went to one service in the church. Because no sooner could I get her ready than she would get undressed. Now that was for 2 years. And I look back on that as quite a mountain every day to climb, because almost you knew exactly what was going to happen. And I was getting quite downhearted, and my 80th birthday came up. And we were going through scriptures, and I came to the point where Moses had to go to Pharaoh for the first time to ask, let the children go. And he was 80. And it resonated with me. Well, if Moses could do that at 80, what could I do?
Yeah.
And my wife then went into a care home, which then suddenly gave me more time. So I thought, well, I'll buy a motorbike, because you need to reinvent your youth.
Brilliant.
But then I thought, no, I'll go and see my daughter in America. I've never flown the Atlantic before. So at the age of 80, I decided to go to America. I always wanted to go with Virgin Atlantic, and I went with Virgin Atlantic, and it somehow transpired.
Just have one more minute and then we'll wrap up.
I was flying the Atlantic as an elderly person without a carer. He said, and who are with you? You know, they're coming through, come round. I said, hello, yes. Are you enjoying the flight? Yes. And who are you with? I said, just me.
Yes.
No, you know, because you're an elderly person, I'd need walking stick. And bad honour, you know. And anyhow, they gave me such a wonderful reception, because I was the first time flyer of the Atlantic. In Moses' words, or at least the scripture's words at the time, that said 80 is the start, not the finish.
Amen. Okay, if we can gather back around. I hope that's been an interesting discussion for you. We were talking about whether discipleship should be, you know, whether the aims of ministry amongst older people should be any different to the aims of our ministry across all the ages, you know, in terms of discipleship being across the age group. So we had very interesting discussion. I think one of the challenges for me is that, you know, what as the church are we offering that's different to what the Age UK down the road is offering? I love Age UK, I used to work for them, but as a church, you know, we've got more, haven't we? Because we've got Jesus. So it's just good to think around that in terms of your ministry. But we won't go over that anymore, because I think it's just helpful for you to discuss it amongst yourselves. But what I want to just look at briefly, how am I doing for time, by the way? 1:45. What time am I meant to be finishing? 9. Okay, fine, that's good. We've talked about what the foundations are. Hopefully in your groups you've discussed what you're building on those foundations. So I just want to briefly think about how do we build. So I've got 3 principles. So those are foundations. The first principle in terms of how we build, this is all very simple stuff, but you know, things don't have to be complicated, do they? Is to look. And it's Reg, isn't it? Reg, have I got your name right? Yeah. So Reg was just telling us his story about when he was caring for his wife, how for 2 years he couldn't go to church because of the nature of his caring role. You know, we need to be intentional when we're looking for older people, because they won't always be there on a Sunday morning, whether that's because they've got a caring role, whether it's because of their physical disability means that they can't get to church. So let's look at who the older people are, both in our churches and in our local communities. You know, where are the care homes in your local communities? Because those people living in those care homes are just as valuable. They're just as loved. It's a real passion of mine. I just think sometimes we so easily forget people in care homes when we're talking about the older people in our community. You know, they're just as loved by God, you know, and in fact, they're nearer to the end of their lives. So we should be focusing on them a little bit more, actually, because they haven't got that much time left. So be intentional. Look, where are the older people in your community? And then while you're looking at that, also look at what's already available for older people within your community, because if you're going to start a new ministry for older people and you say, okay, well, let's do it on a Thursday morning, and your local Age UK down the road or whatever you've got in this area is running something else on a Thursday morning, it'd be a bit silly to run your event on that same time. So look at what else is available. Talk to the other charities. You know, what are the needs of the older people in your local community? And then also look for good practice. You know, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. You know, if you want to start a group for carers, there's some churches in various places that are running some really good stuff for carers. Find out what they're doing. What can you learn from it, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, or whatever it is you're wanting to do. So that's the first principle, is to look. At some stage, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to put on our website some examples of good practice of what different churches have done in different areas. But I haven't got around to that yet. It is in my book if you want to have a look at that. But apart from that, this on my list of things to do. So look is the first thing. Second thing to do is to listen. It's very interesting when I was talking to my mum and dad about their roles in their 70s. And he said to me, he said, I just want people to listen to me. He said, they don't have to agree with what I say as long as I feel listened to. You know, it's a sign of respect, isn't it, to listen? And I think one of the dangers when we, especially starting new ministries amongst older people, that we assume what the needs are, and then we assume how to meet those needs. And we don't actually, you know, I've seen it happen where people say, oh, we're going to start a group for people with dementia. And I'm like, well, have you actually spoken to anyone with dementia yet? And their carers, you know, let's make sure we're listening to people and what their needs are. Or not even necessarily what their needs are. You know, as I say, we're all needy, but what they value, you know, what do they want from the church? So make sure we're listening. And I think without looking and without listening, as I say, we're in danger of coming up with our own ideas. And you know, that's when I started, we'd have an online group for carers, actually, that we started during the pandemic. And the first thing I did was talk to a whole load of Christian carers and say, what would be helpful for you? And we used Zoom because obviously in the pandemic, that's all you could do. But actually, it was a brilliant opportunity. Suddenly everyone was on Zoom, so we could connect people. And then I kind of went with it. I had an idea of what I thought we would do in this hour Zoom every week. But when I chatted to the carers, what they wanted was very different to what I thought they would want, because I was going to get guest speakers in to talk about various things, you know, experts in their field. And the carer said to me, Tina, we don't want to hear experts. We know where to get expert advice when we want it. We just want the opportunity to chat with other carers and to pray together. So that's what we do. So simple. Every week we gather, we chat, we pray. But that's what people wanted, and it's about listening. So looking, listening, and then finally, again, this is such simple stuff, love. Look, listen, love. That's my 3 principles. And we've already talked about the importance of love. It has to overflow from understanding how much God loves us. You know, if we're not feeling loved, it can't overflow out to other people. But if we understand God's love, and we can, and I know I'm talking to the converted here, but, you know, can pray, God, show me your heart of love towards older people. Show me your heart of love towards care home residents. I'll tell you what, that is a dangerous prayer to pray. you get heartbroken. So don't pray it lightly. But, you know, that's what we need. It needs to, everything we do needs to come out of the overflow of God's love. And, you know, love is practical. It's not just about what we say, it's both. It's what we say and what we do. So love might just be sitting in church with someone who's got dementia, just being that companion for them during the service so that they can participate. That is love, you know. It could be giving someone a lift to church. That's love. Whatever we do, it's got to come out of love. And then don't forget our words as well, you know, encouraging people of who they are in Christ. I loved what you said, Reg, about, you know, life begins at 80. You know, that's when Moses went and saw Pharaoh in his 80s. You know, let's encourage older people in that, you know, that they're not over the hill, they're not past it. Life begins at 80. And, you know, in our words, let's make sure we're loving people as well. So really simple. Look, listen, love. And actually, I think as we offer that unconditional love to older people, as we value them for who they are and not for what they do, we're a massive prophetic picture to the world of God's love. Because if you look in the Bible at what Jesus said about how the world will know that we are his disciples, it wasn't by putting on a good church service every Sunday, having professional worship band. It was how much we love one another. It's just so important. So when we're loving, let's know that actually we've been a massive witness for God in doing that. Final thought I want to leave you with, actually there might be a few final thoughts, but this is one of them, is just throwing a little bit of a curveball into the situation. Intergenerational. Don't underestimate the power of bringing generations together. Now, people think, when I use the word intergenerational, people think of that programme on telly with the nursery school going into the care home. Yes, that's an extreme example of intergenerational. But actually, me going to visit a 90-year-old in a care home is intergenerational. We have to be careful, and you know what, I'm thinking about this a lot at the moment because I've written a book about ministry amongst older people, and I'm starting to think, I'm not sure that was the right book to write, because I've done what I don't think we should do, and that's silo older people. I had to talk about intergenerational work in there, but there's a danger. We have our youth work, we have our children's work, and then we have our seniors work, you know, and there's all these separate silos. Let's think as much as we can about how we can cross the generations and bring the generations together. So in our church, I've just started a new craft group. I love knitting, I love crochet, I love all things craft. And when I asked the church, one of the vicars, if I could start this group, she came back and said, so this is a group for seniors, because obviously I talk about seniors ministry a lot. I was like, no. I said, this is a group for anyone who wants to come and knit together, craft together, do whatever they want together. And what has been so lovely, so I've gathered a group of people for this, and the whole idea is anyone, you know, any age group. But this one older lady in our church, I don't really think of her as a senior at all, but a couple of months ago, I happened to bump into her walking down the road, and I just thought, gosh, lockdown's really taken its toll on you. And you know, some of the stuff she was telling me, and I just thought, oh, I didn't know. Anyway, when I was starting this group, someone mentioned this lady, that actually she's really creative and would probably really love it. So I organised a meeting in a local coffee shop, and actually she was the only person who came along in the end because the others had COVID or something. And we chatted about what it might look like. And that Sunday in church, she came up to me. It must have been a few Sundays later, because I think I'd gone off on holiday after that. She said, Tina, I just feel so alive since our meeting. I've got all these ideas. And I just thought, yes, you know, this is what we want, you know. And for her, it's an opportunity to share her skills. I mean, she's so talented. I can't tell you how talented she is in terms of embroidery and all sorts of things. She's going to be able to share her skills with other people like me who are quite amateur in what we do. And it's just wonderful. Let's cross the generations. Let's think intergenerationally as much as we can. So we've looked at the foundations: dependent, loved, relational, created in the image of God. you've talked about what your goals are. We've talked about how we can build, look, listen, love. I just want to leave you with a few ideas. You can't see those very well. We haven't got lots of opportunity to go into the practical things, but some ideas up there. That says craft and knitting groups. That's because that's what I'm doing at the moment. Computer club. When I was working for Age UK, we partnered with a local Baptist church to run a computer club. And we did this computer club at various locations, and the Baptist church was one of them. And we used to have a volunteer driver who used to drop the laptops off at the various locations. And he always said the one at the Baptist church was the best one. There was a real vibe to it because they were bringing people into community. So computer clubs can be brilliant because some older people are a bit nervous about being online, viruses, all that sort of thing. So having a forum where they can learn from others and build their confidence can be really good. Memory cafes, carer support, befriending, cafe, lunch clubs. So I put that up there because often we have this idea of lunch club. And, you know, lunch clubs can be very time consuming, require a lot of volunteers. Well, how about turning on its head? How about finding a local cafe that's got good access and good disabled toilets and things like that, and all going there, you know, so take all the work out of it and just have it as something that's in the local community. You know, we don't have to have everything within our church building, especially if they're not very accessible. Exercise classes, adopt a care home, we'll talk about that in one of the other sessions. Coffee mornings, connections, I put that one up there. That's what Church in Claygate are doing, very successful. Walking groups, even I've heard of walking football. Why not? Or games groups. So just some ideas, just to whet your appetites. If you need any ideas, you might not. But a memory cafe, that's a cafe for people living with dementia and their carers to go along, get support, meet with other people. And I think that might be it. Yeah, so that's my book about Great Place to Grow Old, and that's all our social media stuff if you're into social media and want to follow us on social media. I'll just show you some of these. Oh, and this one. Okay, so this is, if you're into care homes and you want ideas of how to adopt a local care home, there's some ideas in there. And then, have I got it? Oh yeah, then all these booklets are freely available to download on our website. So this one gives you more ideas, sort of expands on that leaflet of ideas of how to adopt your local care home. This one, Making Moments, I wrote this because I was at a conference a few weeks ago and people were asking me, Tina, have you got any tips on how to spend quality time? It was actually people's dads who had dementia, and I thought, you know what, I need to write something. So this is all the stuff that I do in the webinar on dementia that we're going to have in a few weeks' time. But that's, again, free to download. If you know people living with dementia or looking after someone with dementia, there's some good ideas in that. This one, I did this one for me because I go into a care home, and one of the things I find, I volunteer on the dementia unit, poetry can be so powerful, especially when people are losing their verbal skills so they can't chat with you, that you can really, this one lady who I used to visit, she died during lockdown, but I used to do daffodils, William Wordsworth, and very often she would say, join in with the last line, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. You know, it sparks memories. So I've just got lots of poems in here that you can read to people with dementia that they might enjoy or they might not, but I found they do. And I put Psalm 23 in there as well because I think actually a lot of people know Psalm 23. It's a good one. And then this one, this is a brand new one. So it's not tried and tested. It might be rubbish, but I tried my best. A couple of people, again, had been asking me, Tina, are there any devotions available that I could do with my loved one who's got dementia? And I didn't know of any. I've subsequently found out about some, but at the time I didn't know of any. So what I've done is created some devotions based on we are. So it's all about our identity, who the Bible. So, and at first I called it you are, but then I thought, no, it's not you, it's we, it's us, we are. So it says it's things like we are secure, we are loved, we're forgiven, we're children of God, blah, blah, blah. And then there's a sensory thing to each one of them, because for people living with dementia, especially advanced dementia, so it might be something like holding a rock or smelling something. There's a short verse, a little devotion thing, some suggested old songs. I've tried to do the older songs and hymns and a prayer, and then a picture, because again, for people living with dementia, pictures can be very powerful. So no, it's all free to download on our website. You're welcome to do that. What I've just applied for is some funding so that I can get them printed out, because obviously not everybody has printers. So if I get that funding, then they'll be available as booklets like this, but I'm afraid I can't print off loads like this. And that's my book, A Great Place to Go Old. If you want to buy one, they're £8. And I think that's about it. Any questions?
I have just one thing I wanted to say. When I was teaching, I was a music teacher, and my daughter was also in the school as an assistant teacher. And so I was Mrs. Parr, and she was Miss Parr. But she's 4 inches taller than me, and all the children kept on calling her Mrs. Parr and me Miss Parr. And one day I said, why can't you get it right? They said, well, isn't it obvious she's older than you because she's taller than you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Children very often don't see age in the same way at all, do they? That's why it's wonderful having children in care homes, because there's connections there that are just, they see beyond all the stuff that we worry about as adults. So, yeah.
And I just say, as a representative of this church, we do run on a Monday morning a coffee morning, which we call Cornerstone, coffee and cake. And if you need help with computing, your smartphone don't work, or your old phone wants to give up, then I run a computing class for an hour on a
Brilliant.
Monday morning. All I would say is that my experience with young people is that they don't necessarily want to get near too many old people, because they find that A, they smell, and B that they talk about themselves incessantly, and C that life's a bit short really listening to them, and so I have had difficulty with this grouping, and one of the things that worries me is that there are many churches around with very few young people, and if you don't have young people in your church, then your church will close eventually, I'm sure. And my thought is that you must put as much effort into your young people as into your old people.
I agree, but I think what's sadly happened is that in some churches the balance has gone the other way, that they put all the effort into their young people and very little effort into their... I mean, you think how many churches have youth pastors, children's pastors, blah, blah, blah. How many churches have seniors pastors, or whatever you want to call your older person pastor? So, yes, but I agree. We need both. Absolutely. It's vital.
But so often they've been the people holding the church together, in a sense. The older people. They've had years of church, they're on the rotas, and they're the ones that are supporting financially, perhaps.
I was going to say, they may not have large amounts of money to give, but they are very faithful.
They're faithful.
Very regular givers.
Yeah, it's true.
And so it doesn't seem as though the younger people need to look after them. There's food for thought.
I'll tell you a very quick story. When my daughter was at university, they do a weekend for the leaders of the CUs, and they all go together to this big place. I think it's called Forum or something or other. And one night at the Forum event, instead of having a guest speaker, they had 4 people on the stage who were in their 80s talking about being faithful in God, staying faithful, and then they offered to pray for the young people at the end. And there was a queue of young people. It was still a queue after half an hour, you know, because everyone wanted to be prayed for by these older people. And at the end of the forum, my Anna's group, she was at Warwick University, we're all talking about what were your highlights of forum, and nearly all of them said the talk from the older people and being prayed for by the older people. So,
Well,
you know,
that's an idea, isn't it? Put into place.
yeah.
Shall I wrap up? I think.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Tina, for coming. It's been really inspiring. I do want to recommend Tina's book. I've read it and I thought it was amazing. So really practical, lots of great ideas, lots of really helpful examples of how to actually do this in practice. So really fantastic. It's great to meet you in person, and looking forward to the next 3 sessions we've got with Tina. The next one is the 17th of May. And as we've said, we're going to be thinking particularly about coming alongside people with dementia. So obviously do be thinking and inviting others, because we could have more people here. So if you know people who'd really benefit from coming and thinking specifically about that whole area, do invite them along. Brilliant. Shall I just pray as we finish? Lord, we do want to thank you so much for your love for us. Lord, thank you for the way that you have been at work in our lives and for the lives of the older people in our churches. Thank you, Lord, for the way that you've ministered to us through our seniors, and Father, for so much that we've learnt from them. And Lord, thank you so much for this evening, Lord, for all that we've learnt from Tina. And we do pray that as we leave, we'd be very aware of your voice, of your prompting. If there are particular things you want us to be considering, thinking through, putting into practice, Lord, just please prompt us and help us to continue to keep thinking and praying about where you'd like us to be serving in this area. And we just thank you for Tina. We pray your blessing on her and on her work. And as we look forward to the next few gatherings, we just look forward to all that we're going to be learning together. So we thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
I'll put all these back on the table, then people can flick through.